Hi, everybody. It's Eric Murray from the SugarHuddle.com. Well, Sunday night's game between the Chiefs and the Seahawks was really a big one for both teams because in the case of the Chiefs, they had an opportunity to clinch the AFC West and lock up home field advantage all throughout the playoffs. And in the case of the Seahawks, a chance to clinch an NFC wildcard berth. So big game for both teams. And, it was one of those deals that really a back and forth game. Then Seattle scores late in third quarter. Russell Wilson finds Doug Baldwin, who was his favorite target all night, for a 27-yard touchdown pass. Baldwin ended up with 7 catches for $126. And then eventually, a couple of possessions later, early fourth quarter, the Chiefs trying to get back in it, trying to see if they can tie the game. And ultimately, they get a first and goal situation. Then there's a holding. Then there's a couple of incompletions. So they settle for a field goal, make it 24-20, but there's still like 10 minutes left. But unfortunately for the Chiefs, like they have all year long, their defense letting them down, especially late in the game and in a big game. And ultimately what ended up happening is Seattle was able to get the ball back and, drive it right down the field. Russell Wilson, he had a big scramble along the way, went for, I want to say 26 yards, and he had like a 25-yard completion right before that. Ultimately, he found Ed Dickson for a 2-yard touchdown pass on the play. Wilson looked like he was going to kind of run it himself, and then he stopped, and Dickson was wide open back of the end zone. Throw was a little bit wide, but Dickson stretched out and dove for it and was able to get it and prevent it from touching the ground at all. So it was a great play on Dickson's part. And then, of course, Kansas City, they get a chance to try to make it a one-possession game again, and they finally are able to get in the end zone. Pat Mahomes, he converted a 4th and 1 at a 23-yard run, and then he later threw a 11-yard touchdown pass to Marcus Robinson. They converted the 2-point conversion, make it 31-28, but the problem was, again, had to go back on defense, and again, the defense let them down because Russell Wilson once more leading the Hawks right down the field, had a big 45-yard completion, an absolute dime to Tyler Lockett down the right sidelines. Beautiful throw, great catch by Lockett. And eventually the Seahawks, with their running game at the end of the drive, are able to power their way into the end zone for the score, make it 38-28. And, that really kind of put the Chiefs in a tough spot because time was really winding down by that point. So they had to score twice and get an onside kick in between. That's not how it worked out for them, though, so they end up losing 38-31. Huge win for the Seahawks and a tough loss for the Chiefs. And, the first half, like the second half, really kind of a back-and-forth thing. And Kansas City, they took advantage of a missed Seahawks field goal, and they scored a touchdown right after, make it 10-7. But then what happened was they had a couple of key fumbles, and both fumbles were killers, and that actually ended up putting them behind at the half. The second one was tough because it was a long completion down the field. I want to say it was to David Moore, but I'm not 100% certain off the top of my head. But anyways, the completion, Justin Coleman was able to strip the receiver down the field, and Seattle recovered the fumble, so that prevented Kansas City from getting the field goal range or possibly even getting a quick touchdown in that final minute. So those were a couple of killers right before halftime, and those turnovers were definitely big. And then, of course, back and forth start to the second half. Then Seattle was able to take a little bit of control of the ball game. So down the stretch, when they needed to, the Seahawks scored touchdowns, and the Chiefs had to settle for a lot of field goals. And touchdowns are better than field goals, obviously. But, at the end of the day, looking at first from the Chiefs' point of view, it's tough because one of the things with Mahomes, for as great of a year as Pat Mahomes has had, the big thing is, him and the Chiefs, all their big games, all these primetime games, they haven't been able to win them yet. We know about the Patriots loss. They lost to the Rams and the Chargers. Of course, the Chargers game, a Thursday night game in Kansas City, where they had a 2-touchdown lead inside of 5 minutes, and they blew it. Their defense had played great all night until that point. So, for them, it wasn't just the fact that they could win the division and wrap up the home field if they would have beaten the Seahawks, but the big thing was really also, can you win in a big game? Because you're going to have to win, 3 big games come January and obviously early February if you want to be world champions. And we know the Chiefs organization, just like Andy Reid, had a lot of postseason struggles. And, Kansas City's history for all the playoff appearances and championships they've won in the past, after winning that Super Bowl in 1969, from 1970 to the present, they're 4-16 in the postseason with one conference title game appearance. That was back in '93. So this is another game where you really get discouraged because Pat Mahomes, like those other losses this year, played well, but he still got a little bit outplayed by his opponent, in this case, Russell Wilson. So, Mahomes is still 23 of 40, had 273 yards, three scores, also had 33 rushing yards, most of it on that one scramble. So he still played a nice game, but down the stretch, just not quite enough, and Wilson was able to outshine him in the fourth quarter. And then the big thing, obviously, their defense. Their defense has been terrible all year long. For a little while, it looked like they were making strides, including in that Charger game, and then they fell apart late in the fourth quarter. So, even in today's NFL with more and more offense, we're seeing down the stretch late in the season here, teams are playing more and more defense, and I'm not sure even at Kansas City if the Chiefs can get all the way to the Super Bowl and win it, because their defense is going to have to show up for at least one game, and I'm not sure if they can do it at this point. Their defense has been really, really disappointing, and it wasn't just through the air, because we know their secondaries had a lot of issues this year. It's also on the ground. They gave up 210 rushing yards, and granted, Seattle has the number one running game in football, but still, you give up 210 rushing yards, no matter where the game's played, you're not going to win a whole lot of games. So that really killed them, because obviously Seattle ended up controlling the time of possession over 35 minutes. So we'll see. We'll see what happens to Kansas City. They can still win the AFC West and home field in the AFC if they beat the Raiders this weekend. They should beat the Raiders. It's in Kansas City. We'll see, but they're good at beating the teams that they should beat, so they should take care of business. But nonetheless, still a little bit concerning as far as their playoff hopes when you see them still not get it done in these big games so far this season. Pat Mahomes is not only brought in to transform this offense, but also to try to help them get over the hump of the postseason. Right now, it's a little bit discouraging. We'll see what happens going forward. And then, of course, in the case of the winner of this game, which was Seattle, you clinch a wild card spot with the win, 9-6 now. They're actually in a position where it's a little bit interesting, because they can't rest starters. They still have to play everybody, because Minnesota obviously has to win their game to clinch a playoff spot, and they're playing the Bears, and the Bears have a lot to play for, so that's going to be a tough game for them. But if Minnesota somehow finds a way to win, remember they come in at 8-6-1, if Seattle happened to lose, Seattle would fall to the 6. They would have to travel to Chicago for the wild card game, whereas Minnesota suddenly would be the 5, and they travel to Dallas. So as it stands right now, Seattle would be the 5 seed, and they travel to Dallas for the wild card game, and Seattle's really had Dallas's number over the last number of years, including recent years. So if you're Seattle, you definitely want to go to Dallas instead of Chicago if you can. But, it's a great game by Wilson. He had 271 passing yards, 18 of 29, 3 touchdowns, but he had 57 rushing yards. So while Mahomes, most of his damage was on one run, Wilson had multiple runs that are very important. You look at the rest of that backfield. Chris Carson had over 100 rushing yards. I believe he had 116 on 27 carries, 43 carries, 210 as a team, and a couple of scores. So, 5 offensive touchdowns against this Chiefs defense. And that, remember, also included that missed field goal along the way. So, but, it was a great effort. And the receiving wise, I mentioned Doug Baldwin. Tyler Lockett had another 99 receiving yards on top of Baldwin's 126. So, this is an offense that's really, when they're on, and even though they're going to have to be on the road in the postseason, they still have a very capable offense, and especially that running game, number one in football coming in, obviously increased their per-game rushing average with this performance. Just a really, really nice performance. And Russell Wilson, a lot of people say that he may be arguably the greatest primetime quarterback ever, and he did just that in this game. As far as the whole wild card situation, getting back to that for a second, remember they finished the season off at home against the Cardinals, and the Cardinals are terrible, and it sounds like they're going to fire their coach, Steve Wilks. So basically, Seattle should win that game, and that way they'll lock up that 5 seed, and then they can go to Dallas and have a really good chance of advancing the divisional playoffs, and we'll see what happens from there. One thing I said early in the season, I was on record, this is when Seattle was still struggling, their line was terrible still, and they couldn't run the ball at the very beginning of the year. I said, Russell Wilson, if he can somehow get this team to the playoffs, he deserves MVP no matter what his numbers are. Well, his numbers are great. He has like 34 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 358 rushing yards, I think, on like 5.8 yards a carry. I can't backtrack on that. I think he deserves MVP. Now, Mahomes, he's kind of taken a step back, even though he still has the great numbers. Drew Brees has had some kind of hit or miss weeks lately. There's been weeks where they've kind of relied a little bit more on the run game. And some of these other MVP candidates have been a little bit hit or miss lately. But Drew Brees keeps rolling along. So anyways, please go to sugarhuddle.com. Please like my Facebook page and also subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you.